Good afternoon. This is CIVE 634, Surface Water Hydrology, and I'm Professor Victor Ponce of San Diego State University, and this is our class number 071, meaning is the 7th week, the first class out of 2 classes per week that we teach this class. Today, the subject is going to be continuation of last week on hydroclimatology, I believe it is. I believe that's the title. Yeah, it is hydroclimatology and drought. I'm going to cover from, where is it? Okay, E13, starting with the facts about El Nino, and I'm hoping to go all the way down to E19. If we don't get to E19, so be it, but E18 or E19. So let's get started with E13 now. I read this paper this morning, as I always do, and I'm really kind of surprised by, I guess, the high quality of that paper. I have to commend Mr. Shetty, who worked with me for about a year back in the year 2002, I believe. He was with us for about a year. He came from India. I had met Mr. Shetty back in the year 1992 when I was in India for the first time, because I was there twice. And then he decided one day that he was going to do a course of study here at San Diego State, and he came to the United States, and he was with me for about 1 year. And one of the various issues he produced or worked on was that I asked him to write this paper about the facts about El Nino. It's a very comprehensive paper, so I want you to read it completely, okay? Because it's very important. So I'm going to go over it. I'm going to spend maybe 20 minutes on this paper. We have other things to cover. But first, let's start with the definition. Everybody knows El Nino, right? El Nino. What does that mean? It is Spanish. It means the child. How does that come up? The child? This is a meteorological phenomenon. So how is it related, and what's the story behind it? Well, let's take a look. This paper says it all. This paper talks about the definition, the history, the causes, the patterns, in other words, intensity, precipitation, intensity, duration, frequency, and then the impacts of El Nino. So let's take a look. El Nino is related to the Southern Oscillation. So now we know that there's such a thing as Southern Oscillation, and meteorologists have connected both, meaning they're related. There may be one or the other. Don't know exactly why, but I'm not the person that invented this term. But for the last 50 years, we have known about the Southern Oscillation, which is connected tightly with El Nino. Is a seesaw of air pressures, meaning air pressures coming up and coming down on the eastern and western halves of the Pacific Ocean. Normally, the atmosphere above the eastern South Pacific is dominated by a persistent high pressure zone, while a low pressure zone dominates the western portion. These two systems are coupled, meaning they're kind of together. When the pressure rises in the east, it falls in the west. To measure this coupling, meteorologists take the pressure at Easter Island, which is somewhere in the Pacific, 2,700 miles west of South America, and subtract it from the pressure at Darwin in Northern Australia. And from this difference, they calculate the Southern Oscillation Index.
Professor Ponce, sorry, this is Joaquin. I just want to let you know that I got here.
Sure, I already marked you down, Joaquin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, where were we? Measure the pressure at Easter Island, 2,700 miles southwest of South America, and subtract it from the pressure at Darwin in Northern Australia. And from this difference, they calculate the Southern Oscillation Index. They call it SOI. Under normal conditions, this difference in pressure drives the trade winds from east to west. They're called the easterlies. At the same time, high above the ocean surface, the wind circulation is completed as it continues to blow around from west to east. And this convection of air is called the Walker cell, after Sir Gilbert Walker, who identified it in the 1920s. Every 2 to 7 years, the SOI becomes negative. The east end of the pressure seesaw goes down, the west end goes up, and the Walker cell collapses and sometimes reverses direction. So it's a large circulation along the equator, which reverses direction. That's a pretty strong thing to do for the atmosphere, right? But this is exactly what is happening here. The Walker cell reversing direction. With the collapse of the winds, the easterlies, comes the characteristic warm flow of water to the east. In other words, the warm flow was going to the west, and now it's all of a sudden going to the east. And the normally cold waters of the South American coast warm up. South American coast meaning within latitudes of 0 to 20, meaning Peru, warm up by 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. That's a lot of warming for the ocean. All of these elements combine to form the phenomenon called El Nino, characterized by a dwindling and sometimes reversal of the trade winds, which causes unusual warming of sea surface temperatures along the tropical Eastern Pacific. So basically, El Nino is related to what happens in Peru. How frequent? Well, every 2 to 7 years, we'll see the frequency later on. History. Reported El Nino back in the year 1567. 1567 would have to be in Peru. Peru exists as a country since 1535, roughly 1535, when the first Spanish conquistadors arrived in Peru. Peruvian fishermen were the first to give a name to the climatic anomaly. In a normal year, the waters were cold, but every few years, the waters warmed up. The phenomenon usually began to peak around Christmas, and therefore the fishermen called the odd weather El Nino, which means the child Jesus. They were referring to the child Jesus. So that's the origination of the name. The name has caught, or has stuck, I guess you could say. I believe it was in the year 1891 that this whole thing started off the coast of Peru. But then later, a lot of people in England, United States, all over the world have done studies on the meteorological phenomena. So much to say that right now we have a related phenomenon called La Niña, which is supposed to be the opposite effect. I'm not exactly sure who did that, but it's interesting because interestingly, El Nino does have a religious connotation, while La Niña doesn't. But at any rate, let's just go ahead and move on. So here is the story of Sir Walker, and also the story of Jacob, I don't know how to pronounce that name, but Kjørnes, Norwegian meteorologist. And they were the ones that developed the concept, or coupled the concept of southern oscillation to the original concept of El Nino. The 1982-83 El Nino has been widely recognized as the most severe of the century. 1983, we have it in here, I believe. Yeah, right. No, 82-83. It is barely the most severe of the century. Yes, because this other one, also severe, was in 1899. So this was the most severe of the century. It was pretty bad. It was so bad that we suffered here in the United States. And I have a video to show that. And I'm not going to show the video, maybe at the end of this class, because it's a 25, 26-minute video, and it would consume the entire hour. And it's hydraulics, it's hydrology, but it is an excellent video. So I want you guys to watch it on your own time later on. I posted it there, not in the syllabus, but I posted it in the movies, in the videos for this week. So please watch that video. If you haven't done so before, you would have if you had taken open channels. But since none of you took open channels with me, probably is the first time you're going to see it. By the way, this video is the one that has the most traffic on my channel, on my YouTube channel. Extreme traffic, a lot of traffic. Something on the order of 200,000, something on the order of the last 10 years since I posted it. So I get a lot of traffic from just this particular video. None of the other videos that I have match this traffic, because it's an interesting video. It's well done. and it is very authoritative because it was put together by the Bureau of Reclamation, not me. The fellow that was in charge was my friend, Phil Berge. He was working at the time when I was there after this event happened in 1983. I was there in 1984, 85 and visited, and he said, Ponce, do you want this video we put together? I said, sure. So I took the video and filed it. It was a VHS tape. And then in the year 2009, when I decided to go full-time or big time on YouTube, I pulled out most of my VHS tapes and put them on the web. So this video that I'm talking about right now, and I'm asking you to see, is one of the first videos that I put on my YouTube channel. Okay, so, and it is related because it has to do with the failure of Glen Canyon Spillway. And why did the Glen Canyon Spillway fail? Because there was a huge effect from El Nino, from the 1983 El Nino. That was it. That everybody has acknowledged that. So does El Nino affect California? And the answer is yes. Not every El Nino. El Nino is every 7 years. Every third El Nino is a strong El Nino, as you can see in here. So we're not affected all the time, but there is some effect. The worst effects of El Nino are, of course, where it originates, off the coast of Peru. And I'll get to that, to discuss that later on. Causes. The cause of El Nino involves the full complexity of oceanic atmospheric interactions on a global scale. The ocean is one thing and the atmosphere is another. Do they talk to each other? And the answer is yes. This is exactly what the meteorologists have found out. There is the so-called atmospheric teleconnections, which is a name that meteorologists used to describe the talking between the sea and the atmosphere, atmospheric teleconnections. And I consider that to be part of the general cybernetic functioning of the biosphere and the Earth. You know, the Earth, the physical Earth is very much related to its own biosphere. So there is cybernetic actions because biology is all cybernetic. Otherwise, biology would have long time disappeared, and it hasn't. It continues to persevere. So the cybernetic action is there. What does that mean? It means that if a certain effect goes one way, it is sure going to go the other way in the future. How long? 5 years, 3 years, 7 years later, it will turn around, like floods and droughts. Floods and droughts, as a matter of fact, are part of the cybernetic functioning of the biosphere. You cannot have too strong a flood without having a drought afterwards. That is a fact. We will cover that later on. Okay. I'm going to share in here with you a couple of graphs that were put together by the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I came across these graphs when we were doing the research with Shetty to write this paper. So you can see in here the Walker cell under non-El Nino conditions is blowing on the surface from east to west. And it's warming up the area next to, say, Australia. Not Australia, because Australia is in the south, but in the equator, north of Australia. That's normal years. In El Nino conditions, the situation reverses, and now the flow is east. Now the flow is, the wind is pushing the water, the water surface, within a few meters, of course, or feet, to the right, and it is actually coming out in here, in the sea surface temperature along the coast of Peru is actually being hit by warm water. Peru is around here somewhere, right in here. There's a town or a city here, which is a large city. It's called Piura in northern Peru. It's not the only city. There's a few cities, but Piura appears to be the one that is at the eye of the storm, as they say. So they get hit. Every time there's an El Nino, the downtown plaza, the main plaza in Piura receives maybe 5 feet of water. the entire, plaza, 5 feet of water. The last El Nino was the year 2017, and I had a friend out there that was doing some measurements, and he sent me the data, and he said, Professor Ponce, it just rained 10 inches in one day in a place where it's supposed to be a desert. 10 inches in one day is the amount of rain that you have in the entire year. In the year 2017, it rained in only one day, El Nino. The 2017 was a very strong El Nino. And I'll have a chance to talk about that in more detail. We have a lot of stories and experiences. I happened to be out there at the time when this was happening, visiting, of course. Patterns, these are the patterns, okay? And 98 uses the 98. El Nino is not just 1 year, usually 2 or 3 years. El Nino 98, okay? 80, 83 in here, 82. Look at 82 has the peak. So 82 was worse than 98, but 98 was also pretty good. They've had others we've had others El Nino afterwards, but this one goes all the way to 1998 only because we wrote this paper at the time. El Nino years of the 20th century. And the impacts are pervasive, all kinds of impacts. The most recognized impacts are floods and droughts. And typically, like in Peru, if the north floods, the drought, the south droughts. In other words, the floods occur in the north and drought in the south, like what happened in 1983. In 1983 was the worst. They had very huge floods in the north, and then in the south of Lima, Peru, it didn't rain at all for several months. So that was a drought. So droughts and floods are connected. And I already told you the cybernetic conditions of floods and drought, vis-a-vis droughts. When there's always a pair between floods and droughts. And all kinds of other relations and effects, impacts of the El Nino. Many of them have to do with the biology. As we referred in here, we discussed in here the effect on the biology. Now, I'm not a biologist, but I asked Sherry to be a biologist because we cannot disregard the biology. We have done it for too long. I'm a civil engineer. I didn't learn biology at school, but then I had to learn it starting in the year 1990 when my diversification began in the year 1990. Why is that? Because in 89, we did the base flow. And I remember, I told you I was a flood expert, very good flood expert, as a matter of fact. I was and continue to be an expert in the subject of flood routing, which we're going to talk about later on. But then in 1989, one thing led to another. I ended up doing this study on base flow, and base flow is not flood routing at all, is the opposite side of the coin. So I learned I saw the other side of the coin, and I decided at the time to go diversified. I became diversified in terms of learning other areas, which I thought were going to be important, because I had just come back from a study of El Pantanal, of Mato Grosso, and I realized at the time that you could not solve the hydraulics and the hydrology without looking at everything else, including the biology. So summary, El Nino, global climatic anomaly caused by a weakening of the trade winds along the tropical Pacific. The name of El Nino originated with Peruvian fishermen who noticed that reduced fisheries were associated with the warmer than normal waters. The phenomenon tended to peak around Christmas, thus they named it El Nino, for the child Jesus in Spanish. The root cause of El Nino is not known with certainty. Here we go. There's a lot of things we don't know. Top scientists still don't know. We're still looking at it. Atmospheric scientists attribute it to the large-scale teleconnections emanating from the warm water regions of the mid-Pacific. Large-scale teleconnections. That's a buzzword for me. I would mention in there the issue of the cybernetic structure of the world, of nature, physical, chemical, and biological. It's all, nature is formed by those three sciences. The return period is from 2 to 7 years. So every 2 to 7 years, with an average of 4 years. So El Nino returns every 4 years, more or less. Event usually lasts from 14 to 22 months. So they come, they stay, they warm up the waters off the coast of Peru, and then eventually they disappear. It goes back to normal. 2 consecutive events do not behave in the same way. If you have a strong El Nino, the next El Nino is not going to be strong, and so forth. The strong events occur at 8 to 15 year intervals. the last El Nino we had in Peru and therefore throughout the Pacific. Because if the El Nino isn't, if there's El Nino in Peru, there's El Nino throughout the Pacific. It's one El Nino only. You don't have one El Nino here and another El Nino there. No, that's not the case. That's not the way it happens. A year could be an El Nino year, sure. And interestingly, we can predict to an extent, just like we can predict hurricanes. With the eye of the hurricane forms, then meteorologists and atmospheric scientists already know more or less where it's going to go and how long is it going to take. Here, when the ocean temperatures start warming up in certain places, atmospheric scientists already know that that's most likely the cause of another El Nino or the origination of another El Nino. So they can advise the rest of society that it is coming. What they don't know, I don't think, they don't know the strength of it. So they can say, oh, well, there's the El Nino coming, but we don't know the strength. It could be mild, it could be average, it could be strong. We don't know. But the strong El Ninos, generally from 8 to 15 years. The last strong El Nino that we had here of record was in 2017. That was bad, by the way. And I'm going to continue to talk about this later on. It was bad. It was not the worst, but it was really bad. So we could expect maybe add to that 10 years, so 2027 will probably be, based on the record that we have, an El Nino year. It can alter the magnitude and frequency of floods and droughts, totally and completely. One of the first manifestations of El Nino is the incidence of droughts, of floods in certain places and droughts in the opposite places. The El Nino can also affect the biota. So please read this paper because there's going to be questions on the exam on the paper. Okay, so now I'm going to change the topic a little bit, which is, by the way, related to the subject we just finished. And I'm going to talk about the Ford Bridge, sustainable river crossings in arid regions. The El Nino of 1983, I believe, tore apart about 40 or 50 bridges off the coast of northern Peru. 40 or 50 were either damaged or destroyed beyond repair. Why? Because typically we don't know how to design bridges. We're learning, but it's slow, okay? We don't know how to design bridges in river crossings, particularly in arid regions. I mean, I know you guys are familiar with bridges, but not everybody is familiar with bridges in arid regions. And I'm going to talk about that right now, okay, and how we can solve the problem. Now, we all know what a ford is. A ford is a place to ford a river. And rivers can be forded only in certain places. But if a river is dry, that is an ephemeral river, you can cross the river at any time until it rains. When it rains, and it usually rains or it flows for a couple of days, so you can stop the crossing and then come back later. But that is only in rural areas. You can't tell people in the cities to come back later after a couple of years to cross the river. That would be uncalled for. So I developed the idea. Actually, I don't develop the idea. I just kind of espoused, joined on the idea of putting together a ford that would be a bridge, or a bridge that would be a ford. Because I have seen the fords in many places, perhaps more so that normal, typical American people would, because I've traveled all over, I told you, all over South America, north to south, east to west. And I've seen a lot of these fords, particularly in the rural area. And I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I took. Okay, but let's move on in here. Streams in arid regions. Is there arid regions here in the United States? Yes, of course. We have Arizona, we have New Mexico a little bit. We have California, certainly. Southeastern California is all arid. So it's the same thing. 3 types of streams in nature: perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral. So what are the examples? This is an example, a graphical example. Indian Creek in Plumas County. I think you guys know that I did a study in Plumas County many years ago. I worked with the Plumas County Conservation Group. I believe the name escapes me at this time. So this is a very typical, as a matter of fact, a very nice picture of a perennial stream, Indian Creek. It's a tributary of one of the large rivers out there. Which one is this? This is an intermittent stream. This is the Gila River near Welton, Arizona. I was in Welton in the year, I believe, 2007, and I took this picture out there. I had known the Gila because I worked on the Gila in the year 1983, but the Gila is a big river, so I didn't have a chance to see it too much. I mean, we had to cover a lot of territory. But the point is that in the year 2007, I was able to take this picture. And this picture shows that this river is intermittent. Why do I say that? Because look at this very low base flow in here. This area couldn't be more than a couple of feet depth. As a matter of fact, much less. I can almost see the bottom of the river over here. Say less than a foot deep. Over here, there is nothing, which means that this river does have a way of increasing its stage that's rather quickly, and it will flood from here to here when it floods. Does the Gila flood? Well, the answer is yes. And as a matter of fact, the Gila is a tributary of the Colorado, and we know from the references that that we have been looking in the other class, 638. Those of you that are taking 638, and I know quite a few of you are at this point. I believe 5 or 6 of you are actually taking 638. And it says in the Keenan book that the Gila River is the one that came and flooded the Colorado, and that ruined their project of diversion of the water in the year 1906. So this river here, which is an intermittent stream, was the culprit. Interestingly, this doesn't look like it has a lot of water, but an intermittent stream can put a lot of water very quickly because it comes from an arid area where it rains a whole lot. It could rain a whole lot in a very short period of time. Like I just already told you, that instance of 10 inches to 250 millimeters in one day, in a place where it rains typically that amount in a whole year. And finally, we have an ephemeral stream, La Leche River at Pan American Highway. I took this picture in the year 2008. We did a hydrology study over there for the La Calzada Dam in the La Leche River, and I had a chance to visit the entire La Leche River from headwaters to the mouth. Actually, we didn't get to the mouth at that time because it was difficult, but we did get later. Interestingly, I'll tell you that story later on. A lot of hydrology out there. Ephemeral stream, La Leche River, Pan American. Is this a stream? Sure, when it rains, when it carries water, it can cover all that depth that you see in there, which is about in feet, maybe a couple, 2.5 feet. And there's a lot of sediment movement also. I do believe that there's a lot of settling on this particular reach. I could be wrong. I don't know the data, but I have a feeling that there's a deposition in here, a certain amount of deposition, based on experience that we have with the various sites. Example, and we have already talked about this, not in this class, but in the other class. You've seen this picture. This is a washed out road crossing on the Mojave River, Hellendale, California. I was at this site in the year 2005, I believe. I visited Hellendale for some other situation, and I ran into a lady who showed me and shared the pictures that she had taken during the March 2005 flood on the Mojave. Now, the Mojave typically looks like this, but then when it rains, in this particular instance, it tore apart the ford. There was a ford in here. If you want to see a ford, actually, close to where we are, all you need to do is go up north on 15 and then take the road to the Indian reservation. Can recall at this point the name. I'm bad with names when I'm teaching. I'm good with the dates, but not with names. To the Indian Pala, I believe it's Pala. The Pala reservation, it's about 5 miles from 15. Before you get there, there is a fort out there. I hope there is still. There should be. Probably is part of the Indian reservation. They have a fort in there. In case you have not, I wouldn't think so, but maybe you could say that you've never seen a fort. I don't think so, though. There's a few, but there are. If you want to see fords, all you need to do is go to Arizona, near Tucson. There's so many rivers out there, and they never have flood. They never have water. And all of a sudden, when it rains, they're all flood. So therefore, they can't put 1,000 bridges over there, but not 1,000, maybe 100. They cannot build 100 bridges on places there's no traffic, but they can build 100 fords. So they have a lot of fords out there. Typically, you can see a ford or sense the ford is there when you see a sign right next to the road that it says, danger when flooding, please do not cross. That's a fact. Okay, you don't want to cross, try to beat the rush and cross a ford when it is actually functioning. You don't do that. Back in the year 2017, I told you I was in Peru, in northern Peru, because there was a situation I need to study over there. And we got into this situation. We were in a place where we had to ford the river. And it had started raining. It was raining. It was the middle of the event of the 2017. And we got to the river and we had a choice: cross the river driving or don't cross it. And we decided not to, because it was dangerous. So we had to find alternate means of staying overnight, wait until the flood was over. And we knew that the next day the flood was going to be over, because those floods don't last a long time. So we saved ourselves by not crossing the flood or the ford. It was a ford while it was operating. So we know bridges and fords. We also know that rivers can move. Why? Because they try to meander. If the terrain is flat, the river will try to meander. So it's hard for us as engineers to decide where exactly we're going to put the bridge. As this picture shows, this bridge is over there, but it is going nowhere because there's no river below it. There used to be a river, but the river moved and went away. Okay, I can tell you a story related to this. Back in the year 1983, I was called upon to do the hydrologic study of the Santa Cruz Basin in Arizona. Now, the Santa Cruz River goes through Tucson, and there were a couple of bridges over there, the Cortero Bridge and the Congress Bridge, I believe. Well, the Congress Bridge sustained damage during the flood. That was the end of October, October 30 and 31 of the year 1983. The sustained bridges, the sustained damage, the Congress Bridge, but the Cortero Bridge, interestingly, the bridge was not destroyed. The bridge was still standing after the flood, but it had a hole, which was about 30% of its length on the right or left, I don't remember, on one of the sides. So there was a cavity. That means the bridge was inoperable. You couldn't use the bridge. You'd have to jump over the cavity. The cavity was about 30% of the length of the bridge. So I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm sure they had to repair it later on. What had happened was that the river had said, listen, this bridge is too narrow. And typically engineers, mostly bridge engineers, the bridge engineers have a tendency to be structures people. Bridge engineers, the design of the bridge is a structure problem. Unfortunately, not totally a structure problem. If the bridge is on top of a river, and many bridges are on top of rivers. Now, I know there's bridges across highway crossings and so forth that are dry, but a lot of bridges are on top of rivers. They're designed to span the river. And in this case, it could be a problem. It could be a problem. Okay, let me keep on going in here. It could be a problem of determining exactly where the bridge is going to be. Well, I tell you, in the Cortero case, they had to fix it completely. Okay, another example of what we're saying in here, the changes. This example happens to be, happens to depict a delta. This is the delta of the Kosi. What is the Kosi? The Kosi River is the river that comes from the Himalayas. The Himalayas is over here in Nepal. This is the border between India and Nepal. Okay, so the Kosi River comes in here and it moves around. And as you can see, it's just been documented. I pulled this figure out of an Indian book that somebody out there gave me when I was there in 1994. I actually visited, I was stationed for about a month in a city called Patna, which is in Bihar. So Patna is around here somewhere. So then at the time I was there, our team decided to go out there and take a look at the Kosi River because they had major river work on the Kosi. So I said, well, let's go out there. We got to see it. So we took a train, and the train took us from here to here. It took about maybe 10 hours to travel on the train at night, of course. And we got there and spent a couple of days over there, and we actually crossed on to Nepal because the project was in between the two countries. But I was able to get, at the time I was there, I was able to get this figure, which is a very interesting figure. What does this figure say? It says, first of all, that the Kosi is handling or transporting a lot of sediment. Why? Because it's coming from the Himalayas, and it rains a lot. And even though it is covered more or less, but it has to be somewhat semi-arid. There's a lot of sediment movement over here. So secondly, it has to match or meet its downstream boundary condition, which is the Ganges River, which is a very large river, as you can see now depicted in here with a very large width or big width in here. So the Kosi then has to move around because it wants to settle the sediment right below here. The Himalayas are in here, but all this area over here is flatland. Flatland has been deposited over the course of millennia, millions, maybe 1 million or 2 years. So this is a very good agricultural flatland, but it is right below the Himalayas, so the Kosi is going to move. And it's going to move around, as you can see. Pre-1736 has not been studied or has not been shown in here. 1807, so the Kosi river is moving like the Mississippi. Only that the Mississippi, the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge, and they have a lot of power and resources. The Kosi, they have some resources, but not a whole lot. Long story made short, the Indian government is trying to settle the Kosi, meaning put it together, don't let it move. And for the last 40 or 50 years have succeeded in doing that, meaning they have built this levee, which currently, when I was there in the year 1994. So for the last almost 30 years, has been stuck in here, like straight-jacketed. They straight-jacketed the Kosi like the Army Corps did with the Mississippi, with the lower Mississippi. And as a result of that, the Kosi is reacting to it. And when I was there, they were having a flood. It was in the middle of a big flood. And they were trying to, the government was trying to defend themselves against the Kosi breaching its levees. And actually, when I was there, I don't have pictures of this, but I saw an instance where they were dumping a whole lot of huge rocks on the side of the river so as to tell the river that it should go on the other side, because this side, we don't want you to move it, right? And that exactly does solve the problem, by the way, temporarily. Time engineering, because the next time the Kosi would come on with more strength and it will move those rocks, although those rocks appear to be at that point extremely large. So that's the way they do it. They're trying to defend themselves against the Kosi actually breaching the levees, because if the Kosi breach its levee at high charge, it'll destroy all this area. It will put 6 meters, 20 feet of water in this entire area. Let's say the breach is over here. This entire area over here will flood completely. Area over here, and people will die, a lot of suffering. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. Hopefully it will not happen, at least in while we tell the story, for a few more years or for decades. But it will happen because the sediment is still coming. Nobody can stop the sediment from coming. You know that for a fact, those of you that study sedimentation engineering. If we stop the sediment over here and decide not to bring the sediment, all the Kosi would do is it will erode the sediment from here, because the Kosi wants to take sediment. It will not stop until it gets the sediment that it says it deserves. That's another teaching that we learned in sedimentation engineering. Fords. Okay, this is an interesting story. This is El Cora Ford in Rio Grande de Santiago, Nayarit, Mexico. I didn't know about this, but I was lucky. I was there at the right time, at the right place. And somebody told me that there was a fort out there in the vicinity. So I said, forts, I really like to see it. So I took our car with my wife over there and went over there and visited the El Cora Fort. To be honest with you, at the time, I didn't know this was a dam. I thought the Mexican government had gone in there and built this fort so that they could cross the river. And that's not the case. What they did was they built a dam so that they could hold on to the water. But somebody out there decided that they were going to make it a bridge also, or rather a fort. So this dam works as a fort. You can see there that truck crossing the dam, full-blown stage out there, flood stage. Maybe not full-blown, but certainly there is at least a few, say, maybe 20, 30, 40 centimeters of water going over the spillway. And this is an OG spillway, by the way. Those of you that have studied open channels know what an OG spillway is. More pictures in here. I actually have a couple of videos on this, on showing the operation of this fort. I thought it was a fort. Later on, after a lot of study, and you can Google El Cora Fort, and they'll tell you the whole story, I found out that it was a dam. The plan was to build a dam. And in order to do that, that had to widen the river. Why did they widen the river? Because they wanted to reduce the stage of the fort. You don't want to have a very large stage in there going through, because then it will sweep the truck, because the water has no respect. If it has enough force, it'll do it. So they decided they increased the width of the river to about 30 to 40%. This is the Rio Grande de Santiago in Nayarit, Mexico. Nayarit, for your information, is northwest of Mexico City. So it's above what's the name of that town out there, very famous town that everybody goes, well, whatever. Jalisco, Nayarit. Those are the states in Mexico. So what's the fort then? Bridges are permanent and costly. Forts are comparatively inexpensive. I'm going to speed up in here, otherwise we won't finish. Bridges are vulnerable to extreme hydrologic loads, while forts are generally able to resist most loads. Not the one at the in the United States in Hellendale. It didn't resist, but most others can. For instance, there's a fort in here in Arroyo del Descanso. It is in Primo Tapia, south of Tijuana, right in the middle between Tijuana and Ensenada. And this fort is not going anywhere. I'm sorry, but it's not going anywhere. It's been there for about 40 to 50 years. This one's not going anywhere either. This is a large concrete fort of the Tancochin River in Veracruz, Mexico. They had a flood out here many, many years ago, and the local people were clamoring that the government should come in and build a bridge. Oh, we don't want to be bothered, you know, we want to cross the bridge or the river all the time. I submit that has to be based on traffic. If there's not a whole lot of traffic, you can't put a bridge in there. And I'm not a transportation engineer, but that should be a truism. Bridges are built when there's traffic, if there's no traffic. And in this case, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure if there's enough traffic to justify the replacement of this excellent fort by a bridge, by the way. Finally here, the large concrete fort of the Yagua Rivera. This is in Ceará. In the year 1993, I was in Ceará because I was there studying droughts in Brazil, in northern Brazil, studying droughts. And I went on a field inspection of the site, and I ran into this without really knowing, ran into this huge river, which I was looking into, and it's fort. Turns out to be that that the Brazilians claim that it is the widest fort in the world, but I don't think so, because I believe the one in Nayarit is a little wider, a few meters more. And finally, this concept, I'm going to finish in here, of the fort bridge. I thought when I did this work, that was the year 2010, I believe. Well, when is this thing? 2000, the year 2000? Yeah, this is the year, yeah, this is 20 years old. When I did this paper, when I first wrote this paper, because these papers are alive. If I read them, when I read them, I find errors and corrections, and I do it, because there's the only place where it has been published on my site. I consider these documents to be alive. So fort bridge is a combination of fort and bridge. And I thought, to be honest with you, that I was the only one that had that idea, the first person to have that idea. I Googled it and I couldn't find any references. So I said, oh, I invented this thing. I'm going to propagate it. And I wrote this paper, but I was wrong. Nobody, Professor Ponce and everybody else were not always 100% correct. I went in the year 2018 or 19, I think it was 19, for the first time to Sinaloa, Mexico, northern Mexico. I had something to do there, some business to do, okay? And I ran into this bridge. And this bridge says Puente Vado, which means Ford Bridge. This is a Ford Bridge. So the Mexican people locally, they had already considered that this bridge was going to operate, or rather that this Ford was going to operate as a bridge. And it does so. It is described as such, as you can see, Puente Vado Pepe Chuy Sanchez. And this is on the Fuerte River in Sinaloa, Mexico, in the town. I don't remember the town right now, but that doesn't matter. So that's another picture on the Fuerte River in Sinaloa. So there should be, or there must be situations around the world, particularly in developing countries where there's a lot of these bridges. So finally, our idea. By the way, I also encountered on doing my research, the so-called Arizona crossing. This is the Arizona crossing is a Ford Bridge, only that we don't call it a Ford Bridge, we call it Arizona crossing, because it was developed apparently in Arizona or for the use of people in Arizona. This is at the Irvine Ranch, Irvine, up here, north of here. And what is this? This is a bridge, kind of, but it's also a Ford. It's designed to be overtopped. It should be overtopped. And so I found several of these instances. There's one up here in, I was in Escondido, and I ran into another one of these Arizona crossings in Escondido. So they're not uncommon. So this is our final design or suggestion for a design. If you have a wide river, you can't span it because it would be too expensive. What people try to do is span only 60% of it and leave the remaining 40% out right there with abutments. That's no good, because when the flood comes, it'll take over the bridge completely. It will try to claim its entire width, like what happened in Arizona for the Cortero Bridge. The Cortero Bridge actually claimed more than its width off the time, like 30% more of the normal width that it had at the time the event happened. But we know for a fact, based on studies and experience, that the rivers will try to claim at least their entire width as it happens. So we cannot do this thing about bringing in a bridge that is narrower than the width. So, but the width is too long, too wide, and the population is not that large, and there's issues of cost involved and so forth. So this is what we could do. We could put a bridge in there, and then we could put a ford in here. So the 100-year flood will be flooded, but the 2-year flood, that's just a road and you go over the bridge. So it functions both for the 2-year flood as well as for the 100-year flood. To my knowledge, this type of an idea has not been developed to the point of a prototype at this point, but it will. Eventually, it will. Okay, so we move on to our next topic in here. The Mojave River flood, I'm not going to talk about this because most of you have already seen this, because I included in the next class. So I'm asking 1 or 2 persons in this class to read E15, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to get directly into E16, which is kind of related to 17. So that's where I'm going to finish here today. So E16, Ponce, Pandy, and Erkan. Characterization of drought across the climatic spectrum. First, let me say that I was a flood expert until 1989. Then I became a baseflow expert, and the story, you already know it. Well, actually, not you. Maybe I'm confusing here the issues because I'm teaching 2 classes and many of you are in the other class. But in the other class, I told the story of how I got involved in studying baseflow in 1989. I had a 2-year contract with Pacific Gas and Electric, and we learned everything there was to be learned on baseflow, which was not a whole lot. I was glad that I found the Rorabaugh equation, which is the only equation out there in the literature that describes how baseflow functions. And that was good. That was a find at the time. But the rest was just a general talk about, or general coverage of the various issues of water, sediment, and so forth, and nutrients. So we did that study, and then in 1993 decided to do droughts, because the droughts was a continuation. In other words, I didn't have enough. First I had floods, then I had baseflow. Now I was going to go after droughts, which, by the way, in 1993 I knew nothing about. So in 1993 I went to Brazil, because I learned that there was an institution out there that had studied drought for 100 years, since the early 1900s. They had records of things that had happened, things that they had done to solve the problem, and so forth. I said, that's a place where I want to learn what they have done. And so I did, and I wrote a paper on it, which we'll review later on. But a few years later, I believe in the year 2000, it took me a while, I came up with this paper, Characterization of Drought Across the Climatic Spectrum. Over here. Characterization of drought across the climatic spectrum. So what I just shown you is the actual paper. But you know, because I told you that over the last couple of years, I've had I've been doing the conversion of all my papers, my published papers, which are in black and white, into HTML color, which is what I'm showing you in here. And this one's better because you can expand this one nicely. You can cut and paste. I did this because if I wanted to write another paper on this subject, I'm preparing myself for my post-retirement times, you could just cut and paste this paper completely from left to right, or put it into some other place. It's easy. It's easy. Actually, not even cut and paste. What you need to do is go into the code and just pick up the code and put it somewhere else in some other document. So that was easy. So we're in the process of doing that, but this one we already done. So that led us about 5 years later, because I was in 1994, 1995 in Brazil. In the year 2000, we published this paper with Pandy and Erkan. Who is Pandy? Pandy was one of the Indian fellows that came to work with me here at San Diego State. They sent 5 over the years. Over 5 years, they sent 5 people. And these people were hydrologic scientists. So they knew what they were talking. They were, in fact, specialized in areas. I already told you that hydrology has 100 fields. This Mr. Pandy was an expert in droughts. So I said, hey, Raj was his name. Raj, we're going to write a paper on droughts. And we did that. We did this paper in 4 months. He was with us for 4 months. And during the course of those 4 months, we wrote this paper. Now, Erkan was another student that was with us at the time. And Erkan was a student from Turkey. The story of how Erkan came to be my student is an interesting and fascinating story, which I'm not going to tell you at this point because it's a sideline. It's not necessary or absolutely necessary that I do that. Suffice it to say that Erkan was working with us at the time. He was doing a thesis on the Ojos Negros Valley and the climatic changes of the Ojos Negros Valley with the use of groundwater. There were climatic changes out there, and I trusted, or I charged Erkan with doing this. He did a great job. He's an excellent gentleman, by the way, very extremely smart cookie. And Pandy, both of them, us 3 put together this paper. This is a very important paper. Among the papers that I have written, 52 papers, but maybe 10 of them are extremely important. Okay, so why do I say that? Because there's a lot of drought experts out there, a lot of them, but none of them have studied the entire climatic spectrum. They're all droughts experts on either humid areas or subhumid areas or whatever. But nobody, to my knowledge at the time, had done this, cover the entire climatic spectrum. How is it that we could do that? Because we have a lot of experience. We travel a whole lot. I told you I travel, 20, 21 countries, and not every place. I haven't been to Africa, but I covered all South America, parts of Europe, Asia too, China, India, and so forth. I have a lot of acquaintances over there. So we were able to cover a lot of ground. When we had covered from the very wet to the very dry. And I figured we could do that. So we devised this idea of studying drought, IDF, meaning intensity, duration, frequency, throughout the spectrum. First, I had to define what the climatic spectrum was. And that was a wrestle because if you talk to the climatologists, they've got their own ideas on this, which didn't fit my idea. My idea was look at something that was simple enough so that it would be understood by everybody without having to do a lot of study or spend a lot of time. And second, cover the entire climatic spectrum. So we first have to define what the climatic spectrum is. And myself being originating in Peru had a lot of knowledge, previous knowledge, because Peru has the driest areas and some of the wettest areas in the world. Not in the world. Peru goes from 0 to 3,200 millimeters. And we know that the wettest areas are in Cherrapunji, India, but that's an outlier. 3,200 millimeters is already very, very wet. There is no place in the United States where it rains 3,200 millimeters, which is about, I don't know, 60 or 80 inches per year. There's only one exception, a corner, I don't know which corner of Puerto Rico is actually, could be considered to be rainforest. It's a pretty small corner, by the way. Having not been out there, I wouldn't tell you more about that, but it could be studied. You could go Google Puerto Rico and find out exactly what their distribution of precipitation, and you're gonna find in a small corner out there, it rains maybe 3,000 millimeters, which is about 80 inches. It's a lot. Okay, so we here needed to define the climatic spectrum. And you know, there's a Köppen classification, which has all kinds of these situations about how to classify climate, but I didn't like that because it was too complex. So I decided to do this based on experience. We divided the climatic precipitation spectrum. This is not talking about temperature. We're not talking about temperature. Climate is determined by how much it rains and how hot or cold it is. Well, here we took out the hot and cold. We just go with the precipitation. That means that our method is applicable to mid-latitudinal regions. Mid-latitude means 0 to 30. So it's the tropics. From 0 to 30 north, 0 to 30 south, we believe that within that range of 60 degrees, plus 30, minus 30, we are fine in what we're going to say. Why we don't move out of that range? Because it starts to get colder, and then the cold or the temperature is going to affect what we're going to say. So therefore, this is only for mid-latitudinal regions. We actually say particular applicability to mid-latitudinal regions. Then afterwards, we're going to subdivide the weather into 8 regions in here: super arid, hyper arid, arid, semi-arid, subhumid, humid, hyperhumid, and superhumid. And then we had to figure out the fulcrum, the middle of it. What's going to be the middle? The middle is between semi-arid and subhumid, and that is 800 millimeters. We zeroed on that after a lot of study, after a lot of thought into what number are we going to use. Should we use 900 or 700? Leibovich had said it would be 900. Other people, the geographers had used 1,000, the division between arid and semi-arid. I finally did a calculation with the help of Leibovich, not Leibovich, Budico. We did the calculation with the help of Budico, and we came up, plus and minus, of course, nothing's perfect. We came up about 825 plus and minus. So I said, to heck with it, I'm going to choose 800, because this is all a rough estimation anyway. It's conceptual, meaning rough, okay? It's not perfect. So we picked up 800. We zeroed on 800 because it was Kabbalistic, meaning there's something in there that makes sense, okay? Check what the definition of Kabbalistic in Google. But 800 is the 8 is the cube of 2, and 2 is a very good number, binary, 2, 4, 8, 16, right? So we were able to do that. So 800 was going to be the mean annual precipitation, and it's going to be right in the middle between the semi-arid and the subhumid. Why would this be semi-arid and this be subhumid? Should we call it semi-humid? I didn't want to rock the boat. A lot of people liked the way the way it was written, subhumid, semi-arid. I don't know why, but I left it there. I don't want to rock the boat. When you do something new, you can't rock the boat completely. You can rock the boat a little bit, but not a whole lot, okay? Because people are not going to take it, meaning you won't be able to publish it. And I wanted to publish it. There's a story there that I will tell you later on. So we go semi-arid, arid, hyper-arid, super-arid. Why did we choose, why didn't we reverse this? And the answer was, I don't know, to be honest with you. We did it this way. We had to do it one way or the other. Super-arid. Super and hyper mean the same thing. It means extra, okay? Only that super is it's a northern, like Northern European use in like Germanic, while hyper is more Roman. Hypers come from Latin. It doesn't matter. The point is that we decided to do it this way. And what are we going to do? We based it on mean annual precipitation. And we were going to use the factors of 2, 800, 400, 200, 100. Anything less than 100 was going to be super arid. It would be like the Rajasthan, or it would be to talk about places that are close to us, Imperial Valley. It would be the coast of Peru. It would be the coast of Chile, where it never rains anything or very, very small amounts of precipitation. And over here, super humid was going to be beyond 6,400 millimeters, which is the places like in Southern Colombia. There's a place where it rains 7,000 millimeters. It is a very small area. It's in Southern Colombia, West Southern Colombia. I don't know of many other places that would rain. I know for a fact, Cherrapunji in India, it rains 12,000. So that's off the charts over here. There's a few places in Ecuador that are also considered to be on the order of 4,000 to 5,000. So in the jungle of Ecuador. Okay, because it's right next to Ecuador, you know, Ecuador is Ecuador, and therefore it rains a whole lot out there. So this is our main parameter. The ratio between probable maximum, the mean average to average global terrestrial. Global terrestrial. And this is 1, 0.5, 0.25. You can see these numbers are nicely put together so that it makes a lot of sense. We need to figure out the annual potential evapotranspiration. We had here we had to do a lot of soul searching. We already knew all the methods of evapotranspiration. We did some calculations in here, some questions on the research. What is the evaporation of this side or that side and so forth. And we finally came up with this definition. 1,600 was going to be in the middle. 1,200 was going to be in the very wet areas because we knew, for instance, the Pantanal was very wet and the potential evapotranspiration of the Pantanal was 1,200. We also had some data from India. Don't forget that Pandey was one of the authors in here. He knew a lot of data from India. And over here, we get the hyper-arid. Does this mean that we cannot get any evapotranspiration above 3,000? No, that's not correct. We actually found a value in Rajasthan that was 3,500. But Rajasthan's over here. So you can have a curve in here going up to 3,000, right? Between the middle, in the limit between super arid and hyper arid, and then move on to Rajasthan and very, very dry places such as northern Chile, as well as off the coast of Peru, you would actually have evapotranspirations of that kind. The ratios right here, the length of the rainy season, that is also a must that needs to be considered. And the drought duration. And for the drought duration, we had to consult a lot of data, a lot of papers. And we zeroed on this situation as you see it. Why is the drought short in the dry areas? Because there are too many. Succeed one, then it floods, then it dries. So you cannot have a 6 drought duration we cannot have a 6-hour duration. I'm sorry, a 6-year duration in a drought that lasts only 1 year or 2 years. And it has to last only 1 year because that's just the nature of the beast over there. It has to. So basically, we came up with these numbers. Over here, we come back to 1. Why do we come back to 1? Because we read the literature. The literature says in the Amazon basin, a drought could be considered a drought in relative terms, happens once every 100 years. That's what the literature said. So we curry it up and put a 100 in there. 1. At that point, it doesn't really matter. Let me tell you why it doesn't matter. Because droughts are important here and are important here. But by the time you get over here, since the durations diminish, nobody really cares too much. Who cares if the Amazon went into a mild drought every 1,000 years? I'm sorry, not every 100 years. Really, nobody cares about that. Okay, so that's only for purposes of completing the chart. And over here, drought intensity. The drought intensity is something that we did not define completely because we can't, because it varies in a way that we really don't know. We don't know the intensity of a drought. The only thing that we know is that if the drought's going to last longer, it will be more intense because the intensity is the summation of all the years. So if you have a 6-year drought, then you'll have, and we can define intensity. What we cannot do is predict intensity of the next drought. It would vary. And by the way, drought has a way of making fool of the prediction. Meaning, if you predict a drought, most likely you're going to fail. Remember, I already talked about that in the case of the Paraguay. We've been trying to predict the droughts of the Paraguay for 10 years now. And the Paraguay, the upper Paraguay, refused to go on drought stage. And it is only the last couple of years that we have been verified that finally the stage on the low stage on the upper Paraguay has gone below grade, below zero. Now it's showing negative numbers, which is a very strong indication that drought is coming. Will the drought on the Paraguay remain for a few years? I believe the likelihood is that it will, because the previous droughts have lasted 5 to 10 years, and I've already talked about that. So global climate, this global climate is what we have in here. And note that in here we have a few paragraphs supporting everything we had said in our conceptual model. I'm going to have you read the stuff. This part, by the way, here will be on the exam. Very important subject. Okay. The writers base their conceptual model on drought characterization based on the following premises. Drought duration varies across the climatic spectrum, reaching a maximum around the middle. That is true. Why did we say that? Well, we read a lot of literature references that said that the worst droughts in the United States are in Idaho. And Idaho happens to be right next to the middle of the climatic spectrum, middle of the country, middle of the climatic spectrum, more or less, okay, plus and minus. And therefore, there was strong indication that around the middle of the climatic spectrum, there was to be long duration droughts. Now, the issue of all droughts should last at most 5 years or 6 years, that's not correct, because it depends on anthropogenic pressure. Remember, we talked about the Sahel, not here, in the other class. The Sahel, the fact that the drought of 1970 lasted 17 years, or 17 or 18 years. That was because of what they call transhumans. We covered that ground in sedimentation class, meaning there used to be movement of people that were moving north and south following the weather. And then finally, when the government decided to tell them not to move, then all things broke loose and they started having all kinds of problems. So moral of the story is that you have to understand nature before you try to mess with it. And unfortunately, we don't. In many instances, we don't understand nature and we're still trying to mess with it. Unfortunately, that's just a sad fact of sad reality that we have currently, or that we always had that, by the way. So here is the drought is directly related to the duration. Recurrence interval increases gradually from the dry to the wet side of the climatic spectrum. Finally, the summary. The writers have formulated a conceptual model of drought characterization. I believe this is the first time we did this. And by the way, I'm going to tell you a story. This is a good story. That, of course, when you write a paper like this, you want to publish it. And this one was such an important paper that I said I'm going to publish it. Besides, I've been publishing off the web until the year 2003. So this paper was 2000. I was still in the publication business. So if you want to talk about business. So I submitted it. There was a risk, of course, that since we don't have a whole lot of math here, that it was going to be turned down. But I didn't have math, but I had clarity. And I figured, like in the case of the Kerr number, it was the same thing. There's not a whole math out there. Oh, algebra, that's it. No differential equations and so forth. But we had clarity. And we survived and succeeded because of that. And here we also have clarity. And this paper went for review to 3 people. It always happens that way. And it turned out that they understood what I was trying to say because I had covered the entire so-called climatic spectrum, which I believe at that point, nobody had done. So they published this paper. This paper was actually successfully published. So drought duration varies between 1 and 6 years across the climatic spectrum. because we're talking about up here about annual droughts. So the minimum that it could last is 1 year. Annual droughts, meteorological droughts, and it could last up to 6 years as long as there is no anthropogenic pressures of the kind that happen in the Sahel, in Africa. Intensity varies directly with duration. More in duration, more intensity. Recurrence interval increases approximately in a geometric progression from 2 years on the extreme side to about 100 years on the extreme wet side. 2 years on the extreme dry side to about 100 years on the extreme wet side. Comparison of the conceptual model with drought data from several countries throughout the world shows that the model may be suitable as a framework for drought analysis and planning. So this could be used for analysis and planning. So since if drought, the prediction of drought escapes completely, we can't say the last 5 years is going to be drought. No, it could be 2 years and then the drought disappears. We have had that experience in Brazil. Okay, we can never foretell. We cannot do it at this point. I believe we have the capacity to forecast the weather, but it's a 2-week forecast, maybe a month, maybe a couple of months, but a year or 2 years, no way, not yet. We have not done that yet. And when I say we, I mean the meteorologists, the atmospheric scientists, not me. We take that data and we assimilate it to our practice. That's what we have done here. So this is a very practical concept. Figured out what are the formulas or what are the relationships over here and try to fit the possibility that a drought could happen based on the record. Okay, have we done that? We actually have, as a matter of fact. And I intended to this other paper, by the way, this is the paper that we just covered. And then there's this other paper over here. And there's a story behind this, which I am going to tell you. I have 1 minute. The first paper I published in ASCE. And the people of ASCE liked the paper. I'm going to try to find it here. Yeah, the people liked the paper, but they want me to cut it because they said, hey, you know, it's a good paper, but it's not really meaty, something like that. So they cut me down to a technical note. This paper is a technical note. The manuscript for this technical note was submitted for review and possible publication August 1998. That was when Erkan was at San Diego, or 1998 to 2000, he was in San Diego. So that was the first paper. And the second paper is the same subject. It's exactly the same subject. Only this is the full paper. So I turned around and published the full paper in Brazil. I had some friends out there in Blumenau. So I wrote to the lady and I said, you know, I got this paper, which is a full paper. I could not publish the full paper, so could you publish it? And she said, oh, sure, now send it. And they published it in the Revista de Estudos Ambientais, which published in English, by the way. They publish in English and Portuguese and in Spanish. I think they use 3 languages. So I was able to publish this paper in English in Brazil, and this is the full paper. And I was reading the full paper the other day in preparation for this class, and I am really saddened that we did not publish this paper in America because it has a lot of good meat in there. Most of the data that we used for our conclusions were part of this paper over here. So drought persistence, et cetera, et cetera. Long story made short. The point is that the second paper over here is the same as the first, only expanded with more data to support the conclusions. Data which we could not publish with the ASCE paper because we were forced to cut the paper down. So I ran out of time. When I come back this Wednesday, I am going to go to E18, which is a practical application. We ought to be able to spend 10 minutes on that, and then we move on. We have where is the? We have other business to discuss this Wednesday because we need to finish this section this Wednesday because next Monday is the exam. And I do repeat that for those of you that came in late, particularly Santos, that the exam has been prepared. It covers 23 out of the 60 or 70 articles, so you don't have to review the others, only the 23. And out of the 23, I posed 12 questions coming out of the 23. So there are some papers that you will read that I will not ask you. And out of the 12 questions, you have to answer 10 questions for 10 points apiece. The exam will start promptly at 17:29 and end at 19 hours. Okay? And if you twist my elbow, I will take 1 minute leeway off the record. So you can submit up to 19:01. Right after that, you're not supposed to do that. Okay, well, thank you very much. With that, I'll see you Wednesday. And you have a week to prepare for the exam. The exam is exactly at 17:29 next Monday, October 10th.